Hi, and welcome to May's episode of Pathways to Progress. I'll be your host today, Roberto Rodriguez, at-large counselor in Portland, Maine, and I'm joined today by District 2 Counselor Victoria Pelletier. Our usual host, Lisa, is going to be missing tonight. She's out of the country traveling, so we wish her safe travels and to have lots of fun, and we'll catch up with her next month. But today we're going to do things a little bit different. This has been about 2.5 years since Tori and I got onto the council. And we're going to take this opportunity where we're alone to just kind of reflect a little bit on the last 2.5 years, kind of take a look back at when we first got started, why we got started, and then compare notes to what we expected and where things are today, and even maybe look forward a little bit as to what we're still hoping to accomplish in the rest of our first term on the council. So Tori, so 2.5 years on the council. How are you feeling, first of all, just as things are today, you know, in mid-May, kind of looking into the summer and the home stretch of this first term?
Yeah, it's crazy. 2.5 years is crazy to me because I feel like in a lot of ways we just got elected. But so much has happened, and even like thinking about this show, our first show was in the window at Portland Media Center, and I think we had maybe had our first meeting after, and that was like the show happened after our very first council meeting that was like 5 hours long. It was like I think we voted on shelter licensing, and I was like, here we are, okay, this is what it's like. So I mean, to be, 2.5 years down the road, I'm certainly reflecting a lot. I think that I've learned so much about myself in this time. I also feel like we served at a really specific time. Just generally, nationally, COVID was still in the conversation. We started our meetings remote, and then we went to in-person. I don't remember how long after that was, maybe a couple months. So we didn't get, our inauguration was on Zoom, I remember. So that was a whole thing too, I think, of learning the council in the process via Zoom, and then immediately switching to in-person meetings and then having that experience. So it's been a really busy 2.5 years. I've learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about the city, about people, about being in a public seat. But it's been great. And now that we have 6 months left of our first term, it feels like we're technically seniors on the council, but every day I'm still learning a lot. And so yeah, it's been a very interesting 2.5 years, I will say.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you're right. I think the pandemic is the one indicator that it's a different world. And like you said, we started remote. Remember the very first in-person meeting? We had those plastic divider kind of see-through walls. They lasted that one meeting. It was so awkward. It was like you had like this see-through like plexiglass between you and your counselors. Right. So it's a different world. So to that end, I was thinking, I met you right when you were, when you had just decided to run for the council. Actually, I met you right before, because I remember there were a lot of people that were motivating you to run, and you were sort of kind of on the fence, and then you decided to do it. So looking back, what, if you can think of like what made you run, the things that motivated you to run, and then compare them to where you are today, like expectations. What do you think, how do you compare that? The experience of what you were expecting to do and what you've had over the last 2 years as a counselor.
You and I met. I was trying to think about that today. I was like, when did we have our first meeting? And I hadn't decided yet, but I think you had. And I remember I signed your nomination papers, and I feel like we were at like Little Woodfords or something. I don't know, like maybe talking. And I think I was like, I don't know if I'm going to do it yet. We'll see. And I was still on the fence. And then we did like, when I did eventually jump in the race, we started doing like First Fridays together and stuff like that. So that was how we got to know each other. But I mean, I decided to run because I realized I would have given that advice to somebody else. So my whole thing was like, well, I don't know if I want to get involved. I've never done this before. I was really heavy into like community activism and grassroots organizing at the time. I really enjoyed doing that. And when people were like, oh my gosh, you should get involved in politics, I was like, I've never thought about doing that. Like, that sounds terrible. Never once in my activism did I think about joining the council. I was almost like the person that got everyone to like go to the council meetings and like give public comment. That was my big thing. I was like, here's what they're voting on, here's what's going on, go to the meeting, make your voice heard. But I was never thinking that I would actually be in that seat, or at least try to be. But I was very much like, get involved however you can, make change however necessary, even if you have no experience. That's actually what we want. Like, we want people that are like younger people, renters, people of color. So I decided to just jump in, and I really, like, I had no idea what I was doing, like, at all. And so it's funny thinking back on some things, because I tried to make the campaign process really fun, but I think like that the way that I jumped into the campaign actually was great for life on the council because I had really no expectations. Yep. I was going in very much like totally new. And so I think because of that, I was a little more like rough around the edges in terms of like learning about like Robert's rules and stuff. And I was like, I don't know what this means. Like, what is this? So I feel like that actually helped because my biggest thing was accessibility and being able to peel back the curtain of what's going on in City Hall, dissect the agendas, which are very hard and complicated to read, and really just give people like the bullet points of what we're talking about so that they feel more energized to actually go to the meetings and get involved. So it was a lot of what I was already doing, and I was just doing it with a vote now, like in City Hall. So yeah, it was interesting.
So and I'm gonna make some like I guess I'm gonna allude to a couple of things here. But when you're an activist, the attention is not on you, right? The attention is on the issue, and when you then step into the council seat, even if the issues are the same and your positions are the same and even your words are the same, the attention's on you now.
Yeah.
So that changes the dynamic, especially with the way that you act.
Right.
So did that influence your like the way that you then act, the way that your activism like kind of presented itself on the council? I know that I, like we talked a moment ago about the emails, I know that the more that I engage with people, the more I was like, I have to be strategic now, like because the attention's on me, and it's like it's not what you're saying, it's how you say it now.
It's so true.
So did you feel that, and have you changed? Because our positions don't change. I feel like at the core, we're the same people.
Yeah.
But this experience has probably changed the way that we communicate our points and the way that we get out there about it.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I was like, this is a great interview. What can I feel like I'm not asking you any questions. That is so true. And I actually don't think, so I didn't do that. And there were a lot of times I probably should have. Well, I don't know. I don't want to say that because I feel like I've had the experience that I've had and I don't wanted to, say like, oh, I should have done this differently because I think it's a learning process anyway. But I will say how I was as like activist Tori, I was the same as counselor Tori, and I was received very differently. So I think it's like in the activism world, people want to be there anyway. So they're coming to you, they're looking to you, and that's a whole like space of people where we all care about the same things. And I'm representing that group of like-minded individuals and trying to make change. But then when you become a counselor of a district and you're doing the same thing, people were like, what are you talking about? Like, so people were not loving a lot of the things that I was saying right out the gate. I mean, some people loved it, but then a lot of people were like, what are you talking about? And weren't receiving me well. And I think I almost went in very much like I'm not changing regardless. And so I agree that it's like not what you say, it's how you say it. Because to this day, where I feel like I'm very much the same counselor that I was when I got elected to now, like, if I was to do it all over again, I want to say that I would do it the exact same way, but the way that I was as a counselor, being like activist counselor, definitely was, I think, harder than if I were to, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, assimilate a little bit and like change my framing and change my tactic and be strategic, like you said. Absolutely. I really wasn't. So I think in some ways it was great, but in other ways I think I made it a lot harder for myself because I was coming in very like, well, if you don't like me, you don't like me, whatever. And then I think like, again, I'm glad I was my authentic self in there, but it was not easy. Like I had a lot of hard conversations right out the gate with that.
Well, I'll tell you, sort of kind of, even though I'm in there with you, looking from the outside looking in at your experience, you had a deep impact. Because I cannot tell you how many people you brought into that circle and how many people were paying attention because of you, either because they had connections with you, because of your social media, and even during the meetings, like the way that you spoke, you were saying things that were resonating in certain people's. And the reason I know that your impact was deep is because over the last several years, so many times I've had people that don't even live in Portland and they know what's going on here, and they would tell me, oh yeah, because I followed Tori on Instagram. Or yeah, because I heard Tori. And I'm like, yeah, that's how you know.
That's so funny.
And it happens so often. And if it happens once or twice, you're like, whatever. But it was like this constant thing. So I do think that your approach and you being real and just bringing that activism voice into this circle, it had that effect.
Yeah.
So with that, looking back, You know, we've taken so many votes, we've had so many issues. Some have been incredibly contentious, and others have been like just procedural things that are impactful, but like no one even shows up or even understands.
Right.
So do you have like one vote or one issue that I think just stands out that either good or bad that just that you'll remember because the experience of it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So flavored tobacco is the vote of February of 2022 is the vote that for sure I'll never forget. And I think it was also because that we had only been counselors for, I don't know, a couple months, like 2 months or 3 months. We officially became counselors in December. So February, that was like, okay, we're here, people are getting to know us. And that was my first experience with lobbying really, really heavy because the flavored tobacco vote was, do we ban flavored tobacco in Portland? And it was split down the middle. And a lot of people were saying, don't do this. A lot of people were like, I'm a small business owner. You know, this is like part of what we sell as a business. We're like a small mom and pop business. And then we would have individuals that were like, you know, this is targeting young Black and brown individuals and kids, and like this is harming children. And it was really split, and we were getting lobbied for what felt like forever, like since we got inaugurated and elected through February through that vote. But I like really lost sleep over that. Like that gave me such anxiety because it was just like calls and emails and text messages and all these articles, and it was just such a big issue, and I saw both sides, and I think that's when I realized how complicated this job is, because I actually really saw both sides. I was kind of like, oh, it makes sense with the business owners. I understood what they said. I met with them. I got it. But then I was meeting with parents and teachers and people who had been part of this, you know, cause or part of the fight to ban flavored tobacco for a long time. And I was like, either way I vote, like someone's gonna be really upset. And it just kept me up. It was really one of those votes where I got really like pulled into the emotions of everybody. And that's when I was also like, oh, I don't know if this job's gonna be for me. Because I realized how emotional it can get when people are giving public comment. And we were still on Zoom then, I remember, but we had a lot of public comment. And it was just a hard vote. And I ultimately voted to ban it because I have two racially diverse schools in my district. And that was like the deciding factor for me, because obviously I was like, if I could do anything to help the kids in any way, even if it's like a small fraction, I'm gonna do it. And my one thing was like, I never want to compromise my integrity for a vote or wish that I voted differently. And with that, I don't wish I voted differently, but I will say that that's the vote that probably gave me the most anxiety, because I realize that sometimes it's not like yes all the way or no all the way. There is maybe, and we don't get a maybe vote. We get a yes or no. And so when it's time to vote, it's time to vote. And I think that was my first experience too of like, okay, we're making some big decisions in here and I want to do my best. And that was my first time facing an issue where I really understood both sides, and I had to do what I thought was best for my district rather than what I felt personally. And I think that was like a tough one that I'll never forget.
No, it was definitely a big, I mean, I can just imagine the amount of money that was spent lobbying, right? Because it's like literally big tobacco out here, like trying to fight for us to like keep these things in the stores. Yeah, I remember that one very well. Of course, I think you know, because of the pandemic, I think I was already locked into like this public health kind of like perspective for policy, and then of course you add the kind of like the racial and kind of predatory, you know, history of you know, menthol tobacco and flavored tobacco. And I believe that we need like a really strong public health campaign to try to advocate for teens to move away from it. So I felt like what we were doing was like one drop in the bucket in that direction. So I was solidly in that campaign all along. Yeah. But I definitely heard all the other sides, and they all made sense. Yeah, all made sense. Logical. Yeah. But again, I was locked into that public health one. But the intensity of it, that was legit.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I think too, it just reminded me that like because I was coming at it from like, well, I don't know, like they have like flavored alcohol on the shelves. I don't understand the difference. And it was really a moment where I was like, oh, I'm like representing a district. And so even if I'm a little bit like, I don't know if this is gonna matter, it really was my first time, I think, in one of our first early votes of saying like, well, what kind of district do I want to see? Like, what can I do to help and protect the kids? And that was like a moment of coming outside of myself and being like, okay, that's what it's like to really say like, I might not fully understand, but I do know if I can help like the kids at King and Reiki and Waynfleet, like I'll do what I can. So.
Absolutely. And so to that end, and so that was a big like kind of learning experience in just the experience itself. What do you think has been like the biggest lesson learned in terms of like for me, I've said, particularly when I was in the schools, it was my very first time being exposed to like an operation of that size, right? Like a big district and it has all these moving parts.
Yeah.
And I really like getting to know how things work, right? Like context means a lot to me. So what have you learned about the way that the city operates, the way that like public health systems work and the departments that we have? What do you think you've learned the most about that that you didn't understand that now helps you piece it together of how the municipality works?
Yeah, I think that I feel like the committee part of it actually was something that was very, very new for me, because you're coming from the outside and like we're looking at council meetings and we're just looking at council meetings. So the committee meetings are very, very low, like they're not attended really at all. And that's where the policy work happens. And for some reason I was kind of like, oh my gosh, of course. Okay, of course there would be like all these different committees that we would be a part of, and that's where we would craft policy and have these conversations. And I think I was looking so much in terms of like activism, like all of us were who don't have experience on the council. We're like, these are the meetings where they make these big decisions, but really those decisions are kind of already talked about in committee. And so I'm almost like, the committee meetings are so rich with information, but those are the meetings that we have the least amount of attendance. And so I think that was so interesting for me coming into the council, of seeing how much the policy is really crafted there. We're not at the city council meeting crafting policy. We're like voting on policy that's already been crafted in a committee. And so I think like, I'm glad that I got the committees I really wanted to be on, like right out the gate, like sustainability and transportation and health and human services and public safety. And I think that was probably like the biggest learning curve, was like, oh, this is like where it all is. Yeah. This is like where the sweet spot is. So I think when I talk to people now who are like, I want to get involved and the council's not doing anything, and I go to these meetings and I'm like, no. The committee meetings though, you should go to those too. So I think that was something I learned, that I really had no idea of, like how deep those meetings are and how important those meetings are for creating Portland. Like that's where Portland begins, is in the committee.
No, I agree. And you know what's interesting, because they're not attended by the public as much as the regular council meetings are, I feel like they're more relaxed.
Yes.
They're also not as formal. Those have been remote the entire time that we've been on the council, so they're less formal. And so I think like you're more likely to like engage, ask questions that you might think are a dumb question. Right. You're like, oh, this is a silly question. So I think that I've liked that experience as well. And again, it's where like the magic happens, right? It's like where all the big decisions. Yeah. What I think I've learned, and it keeps sort of kind of like confusing me, is how long it takes to get something into a committee. So even the paying attention, like when you tell people pay attention to the committees, what you're paying attention to is like already the outcome of long work trying to just get started into something. So I know that this is my third year on housing and economic development, and there's things on our work plan right now that on year one, when Pius was chair, he was like, oh, I think we're going to try to get this on, and it never ended up getting on the first work plan. And then it sort of kind of kept falling off. And then here at year 3, it's there. Yeah. And so now you're telling people tune in, but it's like, it's been 3 years. I'm trying to just get it. So during that time, there's already been discussions. There's some sort of like rough draft idea of like what the policy is going to be. So that's kind of like, you have to be in. Like there's no way people can be in on that, right? Because that's happening at a snail's pace, and it's sort of kind of, right before the beginning of like the public part.
Yeah, and we have 10 meetings a year, I think. And so I think even that part, like we meet once a month, and that's really hard, because in theory we would love to meet more, but we all work full-time jobs, and that's just not possible really for our schedule. Like it's so hard to get all of us to even like be able to work this into the full-time jobs that we're working. So in trying to get more things done, it's like we meet 10 times a year, that's it, and that's really nothing. And so we're trying so hard to do all this stuff. And then especially for health and human services and public safety last year, we had all this stuff that we wanted to do, and then the whole conversation about the encampments just took over the entire committee. And so like everything that we had on the work plan was essentially pushed to the wayside, because we were like, we need to, have these listening sessions for the community about the encampments, and we need to figure out like the enacting the encampment crisis response team, and everything was super focused on that. And so I think it's also like you're at the mercy of what's going on in the city, and sometimes you'll have a plan and then that it will just get entirely derailed, and then you only have 10 meetings a month, so it's like, or 10 meetings a year. So then we're kind of like, okay, we're at the end of the year and we're just gonna like roll some of these over to next year. Yeah.
Absolutely. The opposite side of that is kind of like when things are happening on the spot in a meeting, or when a proposal, like, when I brought up the encampment resolution, or even this last week when we had the amendment for the museum vote. So when things happen last minute, that's the opposite, right? That's like, whoa, this escalated really fast. So that also becomes confusing. I think that I have felt comfortable with Robert's rules just because on the school board as the being chair, I was forced to kind of learn a little bit of like parliamentary stuff.
Yeah.
But I know that like people out there are like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. Let me know, did it pass? Did it fail?
Yeah.
So I have felt like I've had more, like you were just talking a moment ago about when you get emails and people are like very opinionated and sending it, and then you respond and you sort of kind of explain from your perspective, and perhaps there's a clarity about process, and then people kind of, oh, okay, then it's not so bad.
Yes.
So what's been your experience in dealing, or not dealing, that's a tough word, in just interacting with folks that initially come at you mad because of something that happened really fast, and they felt like you weren't like, the due process didn't happen, and I know we've gotten a lot of that. So what's that been like for you? Yeah.
I mean, people think that we have staff, and so so they think there's such a misconception about counselors anywhere, but especially here. Like, I think people see, and me too, you see like politicians on TV shows and they have like the leather chair and like a bottle of scotch, and like they take like the limo to and from the meeting, and like they have all this staff, and they're like, we got an email where someone was like, it must be nice sitting on your lofty high horses in your nice offices, but the rest of us, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm working from a 1-bedroom apartment. Like, I'm walking to the meetings if I can't drive.
Poor Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, like I'm trying.
My camera's off.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't have staff. I'm like crafting this from my couch. Like, there's such a misconception of our lives. And so I think when people send us emails, they really think that we're not reading them. They don't think it's coming to us. They think it's going through a bunch of people, and maybe it'll make its way to us, because I will agree that is how higher level politicians likely operate, where you have staff, you have somebody that reads your emails, potentially like flags you on some issues, but you're not the front line. Like with counselors, especially like city council, we're the first tier of like command. We're the first line. So everything comes to us directly. And when I've gotten emails in the past where people have been upset, I just respond back. I try to respond to every email I get, even the mean ones, and just kind of say like, okay, here's where I was. Okay, let me just set the scene for you. You don't have to agree, but I'm gonna explain like why I did this. Here's my thinking. Especially with the encampment resolution, I got a lot of feedback on that, of course, because I supported the stopping of sweeping encampments, and a lot of people were like, why would you do that? And so I was telling everybody like, here's my thoughts. Like, here's what I've been thinking since May. And to everyone's credit, most people did respond back. And even if they were like, I don't agree, they were very much like, oh, well, one, thanks for responding. Sorry for my tone. Yeah. And also like, okay, agree to disagree. And I definitely diffused the situation. So I think that responding, being really clear in what I say, which I think is like, that's why it's so great when all of us get time to actually speak on why we are voting the way that we're voting. I just think that's really important. And also I think like I've had phone calls with people where they're really mad and really emotional, and I'm really like, okay, like, I understand that you feel that way. Here's how I feel. I'm doing the best job I can to represent my district. Like, I literally say that all the time. I'm like, I'm doing the best I can do, and it's not always gonna hit for you, but like, here's where I was. And a lot of people have been really great at dialing it back and being like, okay, thanks for listening. I just wanted to vent. Yeah. So I think that happens too. And so that, and people thinking we have staff, when we respond back, I think they get surprised. Yeah. So. Yeah,
I think it's right. You're absolutely right. Like most people, they kind of just want to be heard.
Yeah.
Right. So when you respond, and it's like when you canvas and they just talk to you and they're like, oh yeah, I've had it. And you just, okay, yeah.
Right.
And everything calms down. If you try to be confrontational, or you try to even correct them, it's like, no, you just let people, vent for a little bit. And that usually gets out of the way. Now, you know what's funny? I think when people email us, it reminds me of like when you're a kid in elementary school and you write a letter to the White House and they write you back and you're super excited. You don't even remember what you wrote to them. You're like, oh my God, they actually wrote back. So the people still think like that's what's gonna happen. You're gonna get this like staff, stamp.
It's gonna be letterhead, City of Portland.
It's like they're gonna write me back, just like when I was in 5th grade and I wrote to the president. And then when the actual counselor writes you back, they're like, oh my God.
Like, whoa, yeah.
That's wild. So last thing I wanted to ask you, because I think we're probably getting close to
I know, you're doing a great job, by the way. This is great.
This is great. This is fun. It's like chatting.
Yeah.
I guess looking forward, right? We got 6 months. I did want to sort of kind of talk about current events.
Yeah.
I know that we still have the school budget that we're going to vote on and then send it to referendum. We have obviously a municipal budget. And I don't know what else. I don't know if you have anything else like off the top of your head that you know is coming up. But what do you have in the next 6 months that is standing out and that you're keeping your eye out for?
I'm really excited for us to talk about the State and High Street two-way conversion because that is one of the first issues that I heard from District 2 residents. It's my district, and apparently it's been 17 years in the making. Wow. And a lot of times I've heard like, this counselor said they were gonna do it and they didn't, and then that counselor said and I was like, it could be me. It could be me. In 6 months, it could be me. So I'm really focusing on that. I'm excited. I'm glad that we talked about it in committee. I'm hopeful that we can get some more information at the next meeting. Even just seeing how far we can go with that will be really exciting. And, depending on where we are at the end of the year, because we have like, I don't know, 5 or 6 meetings left. I'm just glad it's in the conversation. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's like a very heavy District 2 issue. So we'll see where we are at the end. Obviously, voting on the budget for our last time, which feels so weird. That's crazy that it'll be our last time voting on the school budget, voting on the municipal budget for our terms. And then, of course, like the Portland Museum of Art vote, which will be pushed forward. So the next time we have a meeting, we'll talk about the results of that, I'm sure. But I'm excited also to see like the campaigns of the new people coming in. I love election time anyway, like regardless if like I'm deciding to run for election or I'm not. I love just like campaign time. So everyone's going to start jumping into the race. Of course, we have a presidential election. I think that's going to dictate a lot of like who's running, what we're talking about. And the tone of Portland will definitely influence, I think, the tone. Always local politics influencing national politics. So I don't know, I'm excited for us to continue to work the next 6 months and like do the best that we can for our respective areas that we represent. Well, you represent the whole city. So but I'm really excited, I think, for just reflecting too, like every meeting now that it's getting closer to the end of our term feels so like, wow, we've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing this for 2.5 years.
It feels normal.
Yeah, it does. And so I think it'll be, interesting to kind of like see how the rest of the year goes. The island tour, I'm looking forward to doing that one more time. It'll be fun. But really like seeing what other like District 2 issues I can really focus on that I can try and at least put into the conversation for the last 6 months will be nice.
I've missed the island tour. Like
You've never been?
No, the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's happened in days that I've been either out of town or just couldn't make it. So I'm definitely this year.
It's
I am
fun.
not gonna miss it.
I love it.
I've always loved like even canvassing in the islands has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The High Street thing.
Yeah.
Like 17 years in the making.
Yeah.
You're gonna get an email that's gonna say this is happening too fast.
Oh, I know. I'm like, what?
This is too fast.
17 years in the. I know somebody's gonna be like, no,
whoa. We gotta study this.
Yeah.
That's wild. I have a couple of things that I'm looking forward to. So I have a proposal coming up to expand the outdoor dining season for the restaurants.
Nice.
And the thought behind that is like if the restaurants can keep the outdoor parklets out after like the tourists kind of leave, you and I can probably enjoy them a little bit more. So I'm really looking forward to having like local people that usually stay out of the in-town restaurant scene during the tourist season. Maybe we can take advantage of some of that. And even some of the restaurants, they draw a lot of people out there. So that financially that helps them a lot too. So I'm looking forward to have the proposal come out, having a conversation. We're trying to reach out to a couple of like restaurant and people that are in hospitality and see what they think is a good idea around this, and of course listen to the city who's going to have some some concerns about access to like street sweeping and cleaning, especially later in the season if there's But that's going to be a lot of fun
Yeah.
discussion, because it's not. I think it might be contentious to some degree, in that people are going to disagree. But I don't think it's going to get people like riled up and like,
Right.
you're ruining our city.
I hope not.
And so I do think it's going to be interesting just to hear, all sides of this and
Yeah.
and think it through.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the other thing that's coming up, and I really not entirely sure of the details, but I know that we're going to be reviewing the short-term rental ordinance and housing economic development. And I know there's a lot of different ideas about
Yeah.
how that impacts our housing crisis, the amount of units that are available. So, there's new members in the committee, so I'm excited just to see where that goes. I'm open to any and all options that are out there as far as having a discussion. And it's something that, again, right? Every year, every election, every candidate has had to answer questions about it. So having it on the table and having the conversation at the committee level, I think it's overdue. Tori, this has been great. We're out of time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You made it so easy.
Thank you.